had in this is to collaborate some of that list. So you registering will allow us to start to formulate and populate a list of counselors that we can, and organizations that we can use as references in our church and our ministries as well. So that's part of us collaborating and gathering together. So please do register and connect. Pam, have a seat. Welcome. Let me pass this on to you.
Thank you.
And I want to introduce Pam Young and introduce her to you guys and also highlight our topic and where we're going today. And I met Pam through a friend who said, hey, you've got to check out this therapist's bio. And now I'm in relationship with therapists, and God brings enough of them across my path that I kind of think he's trying to give me a hint. Obviously, I work with Emma and Brandon at Base Church, but then my wife is a therapist. So we who are pastors often make lots of jokes about God marries you with a therapist because you're a real trouble. But a friend recommended that I connect with Pam and see what her bio is and just some of the ministry she does. And so I'm going to spotlight some things. But before I do, our objectives today and our time together, we want to spend some time specifically focused around leadership, self-care. And that doesn't mean you need to take care of yourself, but we as leaders need to find ways to work on self-care for ourselves as we serve. We want to be able to identify this afternoon some signs that reveal, are we headed in a healthy trajectory or in a not so healthy one? We want to review some of the reasons that we would find ourselves in not a healthy trajectory. What happens to us as leaders and pastors and workers within the city, and how does that affect us in a deeper way right down to the core of our being? We're going to talk about some solutions. How can we find some solutions for self-care? And then we do want to have some time for you to just pray into and say, God, what's my next step? Where do I go from here? And maybe it's for you, or maybe it's somebody that God's leading you toward to care for and help as well. So introducing Pam. Pam, what drew me to her as I started to read deeper into her bio was her coaching and training of ministry leaders. And so that's part of the training she has in working with leaders. And so I'm like, I wonder how well she knows them then. She focuses in on helping counseling people who've been through trauma, potentially related to ministry. I'm like, okay, I can relate to that. And so a phrase I often use is, well, you've heard of PTSD. I use PMSD, post or present ministry stress disorder. And so look at it, we have stress as ministry leaders in what we go through and what we face. And being on the back end of the pandemic, many of us are familiar with that with the people then that we lead. And so I went searching for her bio and some of her areas where she serves. And what I came across was an interview that Brian Warren from 700 Club had done. And Brian Warren, if you've seen him in 700 Club, maybe you've heard of his leadership with Promise Keepers. We've had him in the region before. He's also a former Toronto Argonaut. So in my mind, he's a cool dude. I've been drawn to his ministry for a number of years. And then I'm like, wait, he's interviewing her? I got to listen to what he says. And they were talking about mental health in 2018. And basically what I heard in that interview, what you guys unpacked and the importance of self-care and what people are going through was before we experienced the pandemic. And so I'm like, I want to draw on this thread and hear more of what God's placed in Pam's heart. And for us, and not saying she's the guru, but she's walking in it and can bring it and draw it to some insights for us today. And you may be sitting here thinking, well, why would one church invite a guest who's outside of the region? Sometimes it's helpful to hear somebody who's not right in your community so that you can say, we agree and we identify with that. And then we pool together in our community and say, what do we have right among us for that strength? And so that's some of the reason and this relationship that I was like, okay, hey team, here's an individual who could come and draw us together and speak into our region. So she's not planning to stay here. But fun facts, Pam grew up in Cambridge. She lives northeast of Toronto now in some hidden way that therapists don't want you to know where their address is and all that kind of stuff. But she grew up in Cambridge and got married. Your wedding was in Kitchener at Faith Missionary Church. So she's got some roots that go way back here. And as we were starting this conversation, I'm going to let you talk soon, okay? You're going to do the rest of the talking. But as we started this conversation, she said, isn't this timing interesting that you reach out and say your ministerial is talking about self-care? And she said, I'm just about in February to present a course about the art of sustainable ministry. And maybe you caught that in the bio that we posted. This is fresh. This is new. I kind of plugged it in there hoping it would draw some of you out today. But it's just getting going because you're seeing the needs of that. And then we heard from Peter about a course, and there's others amongst us. And we want to pool because the kingdom of God needs all. And that's what he's using us to draw it out. And so we come down to it today. And so Pam, that's my introduction of you. Do you want to spotlight anything else before we get into our topic?
Yeah, no thanks. I was like sitting here, okay, what did he read about me online? Yeah, it's so wonderful to be back in the community. It does feel a little bit like I'm coming home, but it's been almost 30 years, so the place has changed just a little bit. But I just wanted to highlight that I have lived experience on this topic. So I have a 2-year journey. I won't get into all of it because of the time, but I am a missionary's kid, lived the first 4 years of my life in Vietnam in the middle of the war, because that's what you do, right? You take your young kids into... Anyways, I've had therapy on that. I'm good. But it definitely taught me, could we say maybe a ministry ethic about, serving others, which primed me to become a therapist and to have my own crash, which was a 2-year journey back again. So a lot of what I speak on is been lived experience for me. Mm-hmm.
And give us just an insight of married, kids, grandkids. What's that part of your life like?
So I have, my oldest is 30. He still lives at home with us. He just came back from BC, getting settled back in. I have a daughter who's married. Her and her husband are teachers, and they live in Oshawa. And my youngest son is at Ontario Police College and will be an OPP officer in Caledon. And no grandchildren.
Okay.
But I'm hoping soon. Although I've been told not to ask.
Interesting you just mentioned about the police. At the last event, I just met a new couple out at Rosebank Brethren in Christ. And they're retired police officers who are called into a new career. And now they're pastoring out there. God's doing some great things in our region, guys. It's exciting.
So speaking of police.
Yeah.
I did the research, and pastors and ministry leaders have the same emotional exhaustion as police officers. You're ranked at about the same level. It's not encouraging news.
No, but that's something I don't think I would have identified. I'm like, they're serious. They got to carry guns. They could be going into
They're running into life and death situations.
Yeah.
But in many ways, I think I'm hearing that often there's life and death situations.
Wow. So keep talking about that. What's the traumas you've seen ministry leaders face and situations? If you parallel it to that and say it's the same exhaustion level, go there and talk to us about the problem.
Yeah, there's like what I call the big T's, and then there's the little T's, right? The big traumas and the little traumas. So, there's coming alongside a family. Maybe who's recently gotten, a devastating news, health crisis, or a loss of a family member, and, you're coming in and you're providing that care and that compassion, and there's a very real vicarious trauma, hearing difficult stories. I know my dad talked about early in his pastoring ministry having to do a funeral for a child. And it still impacted him that many years later when we were kids. And there's that, but then there's just the small stuff that's day in and day out, people coming in and, struggles in the marriage and in the family, issues with raising kids, just the day-to-day suffering and, coming through the pandemic. And I think it really highlighted that and brought it to the surface. So there's definitely a wearing down that happens, It's a drip, drip, drip kind of thing, right? Yeah.
And what do you see in us as ministry leaders and pastors and mission organizations? Sometimes we like to boast about how many hours we work a week, but then we say it doesn't affect us. Or, you being a therapist on the inside, you see what our kids' behaviors are like, or we tell you about them, or stuff like that. Just paint a bit of the reality broader so that we can go see some identifying markers and just go, oh, wow, I'm like others.
Yeah, I mean, there's the research, and as I was preparing for this course, just like reading. When I first was teaching on this, and even I had the interview with Brian, it was very hard to find research on the issues for pastors and ministry leaders. There was really nothing.
We're not honest enough
there.
to answer a survey.
Well, there could be that, but but yeah, some of the stats. 50% of church leaders feel unable to meet the job's demands. 90% of pastors, 90% report working between 55 to 75 hours a week. I talked about the connection to the police officers. Women clergy in particular are more likely to experience the burnout, with 65% reporting significant stress and 40% suffering from symptoms of burnout.
Any quick insights? Why the difference between male, female ministry leaders, pastors?
Oh, do you want to go down that channel?
Just go a little bit, because I want to affirm, because we have
Yeah.
female leaders in that room.
I mean, there's a lot that can be said. I think that there's a lot of juggling of different hats. So the lines can get blurred. I know for myself, I was a child therapist, when I originally started, and then having children. So, you're hearing stories and then, coming home and then, your child's crying and says, oh, somebody stole my cookie at lunch. And it's like, hey, listen, buddy, like, there's a lot more serious stuff going on, right? And so just not even having any capacity to have that empathy and compassion for my kids, and them kind of getting the short end. And then also for me, and a lot of women might feel this too, is my parents being elderly and supporting them to be able to take them to appointments and take care of their needs. So it's not to say, men also have a lot of hats. I think even now, today, there's a lot of men that are doing childcare and taking care of parents. But I think traditionally, and I'm willing to discuss it with any, I would say that probably some of those roles that we grew up as little girls, knowing that we had to do and stuff, that we carry that.
And growing up as little boys, and sometimes seeing dad just come home and let mom make dinner, and so I wrestle with that sometimes when I come home. And Rebecca and I both have come out of work days, and as you know, she works at the pregnancy center, and so I'm like, oh, I know this is equal. We got to contribute together, but I just want to lay on the couch, Honey, why don't we order in tonight? But you're right. That's the wrestling, right? And if we don't recognize some of those things, relationships can get unhealthy.
And I think that the thing that is so exciting to hear about these other things that are coming, I'm just so excited, because one of the big statistics was that 3 out of 4 ministry leaders feel that they're inadequately trained to cope with the stress. And I think that's really huge. And, as a therapist, I wasn't trained per se on compassion fatigue and burnout, but I was trained about transference and countertransference. When does that person in front of me remind me of my mom, and they're triggering me, and it's actually my issue, it's not theirs. We're trained on ethical boundaries and these kind of things where, I don't think, and now it's so great to hear that, there's some of these therapy counseling skills and ethics are starting to be taught to pastors and ministry leaders is huge. Because the one of the big myths that I hear is that there's a sense that you're not being impacted by the work you do. I'm okay. You don't worry about me. I just want to know about how I can support my leaders so they don't get burned out. And it's but what about you? And it's, no, I'm fine. And that was me, probably for 5 years leading up to my burnout. Oh yeah, I hear trauma every day. I was doing police assessments for, they came in with military experience, like horrible, horrible stuff. I'm fine, Brian. Don't worry. I'm okay. And I worked harder and harder and was doing less and less, and I couldn't even see what was happening. And so it took a health crisis for me, and you don't want that to happen. Yeah.
Which is why we're doing today.
Yeah.
So let's intervene here. So talk about some of the things that we trick ourselves into believing. So I'm okay, I can work endless hours. What are some things you've discovered in that direction?
Yeah, just, having to give like 120%, and being there, always putting others first, and so, to say like, well, I'm going to take a week off and, not be there on a Sunday morning, that would be quite selfish of me, I mean, people don't say it like that, like, because, that sounds weird, it's like, but, yeah, it's just sort of an underlying message that the self-care is a selfish thing to do, and, needing to put others first, the people, at the church or in the ministry, my kids, my spouse, my parents, extended family, and I also volunteer here, and I'm doing this, and so that becomes just a drive almost that, is like there's just no boundaries. Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about, because I said how familiar are you with pastoral burnout, and used a phrase, compassion fatigue. And that was a little newer to me in the last few years. I remember a book, Steve Fleming, when we worked closely together, he had recommended of Wayne Cadero of Running on Empty. Do you remember that book? The tagline was "Dead Leader Running," and I'm like, oh, wow. So talk to us about, ministry leaders, pastors, compassion fatigue, and some of that area.
Yeah, Wayne Cadero's book, I love the quote, "We don't forget we are Christians, we forget that we are human, and that one oversight alone can debilitate the potential of our future." And so there's definitely that piece of it. Now, just to walk through the definitions, when I first started speaking on this, nobody had heard of compassion fatigue. So now it's more of a buzzword, but it's still a bit confusing. Compassion fatigue is when you have the feeling like you're running on empty, that the compassion and the empathy, it's like drained, like it's gone, it's drained out of you. It's connection to people and being part of their lives and stepping into their stories that drains us of that compassion fatigue. Now, my husband, he is a finance guy. He's a financial controller. He doesn't have compassion fatigue. He's a great guy. Love him to bits. But his work is not connecting with people. Now, he is burned out. So what's burned out? It's burned out is when you have to do a job that you don't have the resources to do the job. So, if he leaves his job and goes to a new job, he's going to recover fairly quickly because now maybe he gets more pay, or, maybe this new job's got more supports for him, that kind of thing. So his recovery is going to be, fairly quick. But compassion fatigue, and do you know what I mean when I say that sense of just running on empty? Like that tiredness? That's what the compassion fatigue is. Now, compassion fatigue can lead to burnout, and there can be overlaps, right? Like, there's lack of resources, maybe not enough staff, the budget, meeting that, cutbacks.
Nobody's done a pandemic before, so we don't have answers to our questions.
Not enough volunteers.
Yeah. As you talk about running on empty, like I remember during the pandemic being exhausted at the end of the day. I never left my bedroom or my office at home, and just exhausted from Zoom calls and exhausted from talking with people. And you get off a call and there's 3 more messages that, hey, you got time for a call? So I'm identifying with what you're highlighting. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's vicarious trauma or secondary trauma. And that's connected to hearing other people's stories of trauma, and it changes your worldview. So when, I was, working with kids and hearing a lot about abuse, Santa Claus starts to look a little bit creepy, and I kind of make a joke about it, but even having that kind of, sick humor, it can be a sign of that something is not going well, right? Having a babysitter come in and I need the criminal check, 5 references,
Yeah, don't trust.
Yeah,
Okay.
we didn't have webcams back then, but, just the lack of trust in the world, right? Like your worldview actually starts to shift and to change because of all the stories you've heard. So I kind of think of it like a little bit like a Venn circle, right? So you can have compassion fatigue, you can have vicarious trauma, and you can have burnout, but you can, if you're in the center and you've got all those 3 things, that's a lot. And it's, we're like elastics. God made us to be able to stretch and, to have resilience and that type of thing, but we all have a breaking point. And, put in enough things, it can be one little thing, and then that becomes the breaking point. So, yeah.
How, I'm thinking of some of our leaders who are a bit older than me in the room, and I've walked closest with Pastor Steve Fleming and Ken Miles, and I've seen those leaders walk through deaths, traumatic deaths in their churches, and we all kind of zone in when a leader's walking through that, and how are they coping, and how's the congregation? But now we got the social media, and where does that fit in the trauma pieces for us as leaders, and what kind of recovery is needed from that? What people say about you online, what they don't say about you, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, like, I don't listen to the news. I mean, like, I'm careful. Like, you have to be very aware of your trauma inputs, even if they're not kind of connected to work. But the good news about this, and the thing that is so encouraging, is that, learning about it, knowing what are your warning signs, what happens first before that break comes. So, I've been over 10 years. I've never had a break because I know now what my warning signs are, and I listen to that.
Break, and you mean breakdown.
Breakdown, yes. Yeah, where I had to leave and stuff. And so there's things like when you know this, like, having relationships outside of your work, friendships, building resiliency, having hobbies, and it's not just self-care. Like, I feel like everyone's like, just do self-care. And it's like, yeah. But, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's kind of that, right? Like, self-care is the base, food, shelter, sleep. We got to get that in line. But you need connections. You need to feel safe. You need to have love. Like, those are the things that build resiliency. Being an experienced pastor builds resiliency, getting into, late 50s, you're not taking stuff so seriously anymore, right? So there's this level of maturity that comes with that, but definitely for new grads, it's, get those connections, cultivate, people that you can just be you and be real, and
That's good. So you're taking us into some solutions,
right.
Some things to do to get healthier. So you referenced about self-care, and it's not just, I go to the Scandinavian spa every other month, and I don't eat all junk food all week. I save it for 5 days and not 7 and stuff like that. So you're going deeper than that. You're saying, hey, there's some things I hear you saying, talk about signs. So we need to become self-aware of some of our own signs. How do we discover some of that, or to be able to identify what our signs might be?
Yeah, so there's some tools online and stuff. If I've brought some business cards, and there's a QR code to my website, and if you look for the resources, there's an assessment tool called the ProQuell, which measures compassion satisfaction, so kind of the opposite of compassion fatigue. It measures burnout and also the vicarious trauma. And that's kind of, if you start doing any kind of reading about compassion fatigue, that's the test. But, I don't want to often just go to answer 30 questions. So what I do is I think of a traffic light. So we got the red zone, yellow zone, and green zone, So, I can say to myself, okay, what zone am I in? Now, the green zone is like, just got back from vacation, rested, been in the sun, life is good, got lots of energy. That's the green zone. The flip side is the red zone. That's where you are to the place where you're not functioning. Like, so, your body's shut down, your relationships are suffering, you're isolating yourself, you're just go, 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 irritability, those type of things. That's the red zone. I would say, being honest, I'm 80% of the time in the yellow zone. So it's more of a question, am I in the yellow zone closer to the green, or am I getting closer to the red? And so that's, kind of what I use as a tool just for myself to measure where I'm at. And that can change, right? Like I can start off my day, I've had a good night's sleep, maybe it's, I don't know, Friday, so the weekend's coming for me, and I'm doing good, and and then I might have a really, really difficult client who's had a lot of trauma, and I heard a lot of difficult stories, and so being kind of in the green zone, I'm now moving towards the red zone. So it's like, okay, I need to get up, because I work from home, so it's easy to not go anywhere. But I need to step outside, I need to get some fresh air, grab a cup of tea, take a breath, okay, come back in. I've now just pulled myself back up again towards that green zone. But sometimes it's seasons. Like when my dad passed away and we were taking care of my mom, I was pretty close to the red zone. So it meant that I knew I had to say no a lot to a lot of requests. And it was tough because, if the other stuff in my own life wasn't going on, I would have been so on it. But it's like, no, I can't. I gotta, take care. So.
I was just going to add to the list, probably each of you are thinking of your own signs of things that are indicators of burnout or tired. Even in marriage, we have it, right? Surprise, surprise. So Rebecca and I talk that out, and sometimes she's the one to identify my signs and said, hey, you're being really short and snappy with me. And I want to say, no, I'm not. I'm like, shoot, she's right. And so I have to submit to a thought of, this is my best friend, and she's seeing something in me that I'm not seeing in myself. And so who are the people that we walk with like that? Sometimes it's our staff, but sometimes we don't have that relationship with our staff, or we want to look like we have it all together to our staff. So therefore, when you say relationships even outside of our immediate circles that we have, and so picking up from Pastor Steve again, I learned about having mentors that are outside of my church community and in submitting to them. Ken just talked about that in the last session as well, of having go-to people that you give them permission to call out your stuff, that they can identify it or see it. Or maybe it's your staff, you give them permission for your staff to go to them and say, hey, he's showing signs, you better talk to him, But just finding ways to identify those, because I've grown and old enough now to recognize I don't always see it in myself first before others see it in me. Yeah. You're talking solutions. I'm curious, another thought came to my mind was, do you see more ministry leaders and pastors or their spouses for counseling? Maybe you shouldn't answer that question. That just came through my mind. I'm like, I wonder if Rebecca goes to see you at all. And she's not telling me, but anyway, we'll keep that one unanswered. So cultivating meaningful relationships. Where have you seen some good, meaningful relationships work for ministry leaders and partners? Because we are careful of, who we connect with, who we confide in. Obviously, a therapist is one. And how can we know there's safety in coming to a therapist in some of that realm? What's the experience like?
Yeah, I think there's various levels of it, so to speak, right? I'm obviously a huge fan of therapy, a little biased that way. And I know, too, because that was the thing that really helped me, And for me, I really had to struggle with the feeling that I was being hypocritical, right? I was coaching parents and talking to them about their kids, and then I come home and I snap at my kid because they're fighting about a cookie, right? Like, and all the tools that I'm teaching, like, I'm not, right? And so, and knowing that some of my history and the trauma that I had experienced was also part of that. It wasn't, it was those unhealed wounds. And so as a psychotherapist, we're actually like required to go for therapy ourselves. Well, they call it effective use of self, which is a weird way to say it, but that's having the therapist, the mentor, the coach, the person that you're being accountable to, that's going to push in under the iceberg, like what's really going on deeper. But I think, too, there's just something about having fun, right? And, you can't, hang out with a therapist and, well, anyways, that's another whole discussion. But you know what I mean? Like, so having the buddy, like, whatever it is, like golf or fishing or, playing games, like, just like where you can like laugh your heads off, and be silly. And, they kind of get you and they get the weird humor and, that kind of thing. And just like laughter and those positive interactions are really important. And, where, again, they'll laugh with you, but they'll also call you on stuff too, right? And so, I think the thing that makes what I hear in my office and makes me really sad is, and I don't know if there's a solution to this, it's just an observation, but when you're on staff of a church or in a ministry, and that is your community, and that's who you hang out with all the time, and they're also maybe cynical, and they're getting burned out. Like an organization or a church or a ministry can have, as an organization, compassion fatigue, right? Yeah. And can be burned out. And then that's where the cynicism happens, and the, this, and we dump on each other, and I call it sliming, right? And, and then, there's poor choices that are being made. Some of them are like unethical, or a person has to be let go. And then who's there for them, right? Because the community that they were part of in Friends is the community that's wounded them, right? And so they're hurt and they're bleeding, and there's like not really anyone around them. So that's where, I think, even get involved in the community in not even just Christian things, but, joining a soccer league or, those kind of things, I think are really healthy to balance it.
You remind me of something. A sign for me is when I say the phrase, I need to laugh again. And it's been too long since I laughed. Or one of those, deep, when, like my temples hurt, depth of laughing, right? And so getting back to some of those things that are just light and easy. But when was the last time I laughed or had fun or, just joy and some of that? And then you bring it right down to the team. And I'm more thinking about self-care for me. But, the team could be compassion fatigue and gone through. And then we don't see our own signs because we're all feeling this. And so as I connected with my therapist, a person who I call my therapist, I said to them, I want you to help me connect the dots in my life because I can't see them for myself sometimes. I want you to ask the hard questions to me because I just want to trust this, that somebody else can discern with the Holy Spirit and do some things. And Brian, you said it 3 times in the last hour. I think it's something we should talk about. I'm like, really? I did? And they say, yeah. And I'm like, okay, I trust you. This is a spot we need to go to. So a number of things you're pulling together of just finding fun, relationships, but then trust. So as therapists and being married to one, I know some of the training you go through that you can help us identify some things and see some things. Talk a bit about that, of just what your training involves to help then pinpoint what we can't see ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question because it really depends on personality, right? And, what is helpful for one person versus another, right? Okay. Yeah. I think we talk about boundaries, and there's lots on that. By the way, Boundaries for Leaders by Dr. Henry Cloud is a fantastic book.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, just really, really recommend it. But yeah, just even being able to have a transition from like work life to home life, and how does that look? And it becomes like that became really hard, with the pandemic when we were working from home all the time and such. But is there a way that you can take off your role, as a leader and put on just, the role of, mom, dad, like partner, that type of thing, and not bringing that home
Right.
kind of with
Yeah.
you. So, I mean, how that looks like, a walk, cup of tea, the drive home, and this is where it looks different for everybody,
Yeah.
right? And the thing is, like, when you're expected to, come home, you're having your supper, and then you're going back for a church meeting, right? There's a little bit of like on again, off again, on again, but it's important to, and maybe it's, the night you have to be an evening meeting, maybe it's just staying at the church, so that's, but then the next day, you got to make the time that you stole from, right?
Yep.
Because that's the
Yeah, because you can't
balance.
burn the candle at both ends.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've heard an example that I've picked up a little bit of, a day of meetings, a day of ministry, and then you got an evening meetings like you just referred to, and one is okay. 2 nights in a row could be okay. If I do a third night, I need to ask Rebecca and talk about it. And 4 nights, we agreed, she should say it's not allowed. And this would be 4 full days and 4 full evenings and burning the candle. Everybody's different, but that's just a rhythm and a boundary that it's not that. So what we do is we have a conversation about it, so that, hey, has this been 3 weeks in a row you've been doing the same pattern, and then where are you getting rest and where are you getting your tank filled elsewhere?
Yeah, that's huge. And I mean, a lot of times what you hear out there is like work-life balance. And I don't, I find that balance thing tricky, especially when I talk to clients who, and even looking at my family and that type of thing. How do you balance that, right? Because maybe a Sunday morning, is that your family going to church, or is that your job, or like, so yeah, like I would say it's more rhythms. There's going to be certain times in the calendar year where it's going to be busier, and you might have to have, those meetings. But then when there's those times where it's a window of being slower, not using that to organize your email box, and you know what I mean? Like giving yourself that space. So it's more of a rhythm. And the thing that I really liked about Wayne Cadero's book is he talks about the rule of life, trellis. So, and I think this is, speaking to what you talk about. And so if you think of a trellis, have you heard of the rule of life? Do you know? Okay, a few of you. Yeah, it's a very old tradition, and there's different variations of it. But you got the vertical support system, and then you got the horizontal support system. So the verticals are like a Sabbath day, like what's your one day of the week that you're, not on. Prayer, sacred reading, obviously the Bible, but also like biographies of, people that like, I mean, I love Mother Teresa and her story, and she was someone who lived right in the heart of Calcutta. I was able to see her place and the work she did, and just how did they balance that, And then the horizontals, reaching out, that's the relationships, restoration, and relating. So, yeah, those are things, just supports to put yourself in a place where if you can lean on that.
Yeah, good. I want to open it up to you guys to ask questions if you have some for Pam, and maybe Jeremy can run the mic again. But something you've heard her touch on, or you just like her to unpack just a little bit further. What questions do you have?
Put your hand up if you got a question so I can see.
Therapists in the room can ask questions too.
So Pam, you talked about the yellow zone. So for you, can you share what a good yellow zone is for us so we can be more proactive, not reactive? Any type of tip?
Yeah, so in the yellow zone, it's knowing for yourself what areas start to slip. So when I'm in the yellow zone getting towards the red, I can almost guarantee I haven't given myself a day of rest. And so I just know that for myself, that might not be for others, but it's looking at what is going to fill the tank again, you know, because you're connecting in, you're giving out, giving out, giving out. And so how can you fill that tank of empathy and compassion up again to be able to go and serve others?
So I've had the funniest thing happen to me. My wife said to me, I was eating dinner, she said, "Are you here?" And then she said, "I want to be treated like a client." Is there something that we can do as couples when we're heading the red zone together, like go to a marriage retreat or something like that, or go for therapy or enrichment therapy?
Thanks for your transparency.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so huge. My marriage was actually the thing that was the most injured in that process. So, you know, I'm just so thankful for God that God gave me that health crisis because it's not easy being married to a therapist. Because it was always, he had the problem. I'm not the problem. I'm not burned out. You know, I'm not. And, you know, I went to we went to a marriage intensive because we were just like taking it out on each other. And I'll never forget it. The therapist leading it, I went and I laid the whole list down, everything that was wrong with him, because it was like I felt like all my hurt and my pain was like his fault. And the therapist looked at me and said it very kindly, but was like, "That's a lot of assumptions that you've just made." And it was like I'd gotten like slapped on the face, right? So, yeah, and that's the thing. Now, because of the tools we got, and I think Focus on the Family's got some really good retreats where you go away. Yeah, big plug for that. Tara Lalonde and Jeff Danish, I worked with them. They lead those, and they're just fantastic. You're pulled out into you're fed well, and you've got this beautiful setting, and they just love on you, but they have the hard conversations, and you can be vulnerable. So I'm so glad you mentioned that, and thank you, because that is a very important thing to protect. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of relationships and friendships outside your church? Because I feel like sometimes I feel a little hypocritical because I'm trying to foster my congregation to be a community and to love each other and to be all in each other's lives. And I really need friends where I'm not Pastor Aaron.
Yeah, it's so huge, and I think that's sometimes, again, where that can kind of feel like selfish. The interesting thing is that for my husband in his work, like, he has friends at his work, and they'll go out together, after work for wings and stuff, and they'll play soccer together. But none of those people are upset that he has friends outside of his work. Right? Like, it's kind of, like, none of them are like, well, like, gee, you're hanging out with them and not with us, right? So I don't know, like, why, because I think we can have both and I think that's healthy, right? And the thing is, though, with compassion fatigue and burnout is, and this is another, like, sign, if you will start to isolate. Like, it is guarantee 100%, I see it. Like, you will not want to go out. Like, and you don't want to even do the coffee, and you isolate more and more and more. So, so you definitely don't want that. Yeah. Yeah, if you're pulling away, it's a big warning sign.
Following on that question, that was loud. Following on that question, so sometimes for pastors' wives, right, even though they're not serving in the ministry, they are still seen, and they're still in a certain way in a position of leadership, and everybody observes them and sees what they're talking about or how they're behaving. And then for pastors, even though they're leading and they're wanting to be friendly and genuine, they can't be fully authentic about everything. So as we become adults, it's hard to make adult friendships sometimes, especially when you've been in the church for so long and your life is organized around it. So what tips do you give to people who are in positions of leadership to build new friendships outside of the church where they can truly be themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know, this group right here, this is very protective, right? And I don't know how well you know each other, if you get together, if you have breakout groups, but connecting with others that do the work that you do but are in like other contexts and that type of thing can be like really helpful. But yeah, like you mean that you are kind of in a fishbowl, which can be an opportunity and a blessing, because if you're teaching and showing healthy boundaries and you're showing self-care, then, you know, that gives permission within the whole church to have open conversations about mental health, about, like, how do we deal or support this family that's dealing with a suicide, right? Like, those types of things are so wonderful. But, yeah, I mean, it's, like, finding, like, if it's joining a running club or, like, you know, curling or, you know, a book club or those kind of things, and that's, you know, kind of what's out in the community. And when I go in those contexts, I don't like telling people I'm a psychotherapist. So, because I just don't want anyone to know me as that person, right? And so it could be the same thing. And I think it's okay to have permission to create a job title like, you know, I'm the founder of Hope Harbor Center. What? Don't worry about it. It's great. I do some coaching and other stuff. That's it. And most people are okay with that. But yeah, just be able to do that.
I wondered if Ken, you'd speak to the relationship you and Steve have had for many years, because I see it as a mutual support. And you didn't pastor in the same churches, but how did you guys? Could you just summarize that in the last session? I was talking about the verse from Hebrews 13:17 that talks about to be submissive to those that are over you in the Lord, because they watch for your soul and they're going to give an account. And to do this, so if you don't, it's unprofitable to you. So I was sharing, I was at a meeting, and in that meeting, that verse was read, and it was a meeting of pastors like this. And he just said, you know who you're going to give an account for, but who's giving an account of your soul? Who's watching your soul? And he said that needs to be formalized, not just in general. I have a number of people. And so I came back to the city. We were in Peterborough, actually. And I was thinking all the way, well, who I was younger, much younger. But that doesn't take away from needing it as you're older. There's a lot of old people in the Bible that messed up badly. But I came back, and there was a pastor in the city, and I just shared that with him. The need to have a pastor, someone that would watch for my soul, someone that I could confront me. If you see anything, you talk to me about this. And so we met, I think at that time we met weekly for a while, and then I think it was bi-weekly. But I would sit in his den, and I would just open my heart. And, you know, I don't think I've ever had therapy, but I probably had more therapy in those sessions. I would go away from those sessions. I mentioned it in the first meeting we had today. I remember one time literally just pulling out and around the corner. I can think of it vividly in my mind. I felt so clean. It's because I had no secrets. I'd shared everything with them. I'd shared my ambitions, my faults,
my temptations. Here's another thing. Someone needs to know your deepest temptation. Not everybody needs to know it. Someone needs to know your deepest temptation. Someone that loves you and cares for you, praying for you, and we all need someone to watch for our soul. I don't know if that's the essence you wanted me to share, but in the city, we just met back and forth on a regular basis, and I have that till today. Different people, but to today.
I have a question. Do you find, you spoke about this a little bit, but try and prime the pump. Do you find often that, maybe often's a bad word, do you find that pastors are sometimes resilient towards extra help and therapy because of the hypocrisy thing, or we're supposed to physician heal thyself, have it together, lead our people? What would happen if people knew that I'm in therapy? Do you find that a roadblock for people getting the care?
Is it okay if I say yes? Yeah. You want the slap? Yeah. It's tough. I think it's shifting. I'm encouraged by it. I mean, the very fact we're having this conversation is great, but I was talking to someone who does a lot of work. She set up her whole ministry around supporting ministry leaders and pastors, and she's shifted away from it because, I mean, she went all over across North America. I mean, her ministry was a lot bigger than mine, but she's like, it's falling on deaf ears. And, you know, it's the sense of, well, I'm okay, but can you teach me so that I can make sure that my volunteers don't get burned out, because I really need them to keep going. So, like, just show me how I can support them so they don't get compassion fatigue and burned out. You know, and so to hear that, you know what, it starts with you is so important. Yeah.
So we as leaders need to model
Yeah.
not the perfect life, but the way to get healthier. And part of that is counseling and boundaries and self-care and all the things you've highlighted today.
Yeah, and normalizing things like
Yeah.
anxiety and depression and, you know, the struggles of life and suffering. And, you know, that's okay. This is a season, you know. There could be ambiguous loss happening right now, right? Like having those conversations are huge.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Pam. We want to have some time to pray around your table, but before you do, I'm going to ask those who are therapists or ministry leaders for this type of direction of health and inner healing just to stand up again to identify in the room. So Steve, I'd like you to stand up as well, focus on the family. And Emma Richardson had to leave earlier, but these are people we can have conversation with. Love the connection with focus on the family and marriages. Norm, you brought that out, and I know, Steve, if I gave you the mic, you would do a good plug, but you got information out on the table, right? And we want to hear more of that. And Crossways to Life, Peter and Lydia stepped in as a therapist, and Emma with Ember, and there's more in our city. And you guys know more, so we're going to collaborate some of those, but talk to some of these individuals about this path for ourselves first, and let's model it there, and then it will overflow into those we lead and care for. Thank you.
Can I just say one thing, too? You don't have to preach about it from the front. I was in a church service where the pastor thought that in order to be, you know, he would be, like, vulnerable. And I was like, well, you just shared way too much. Like, you know, nobody has to know. It'll come out through the fruit of the work that you're doing. They don't have to know. I mean, if the conversation happens and it's appropriate and it's a one-on-one type of thing. But yeah, don't feel like you have to broadcast it on the website or something. But yeah.
Talk to us about this new course, The Art of Sustainable Ministry, because we want to be sustainable, we want to keep going. What stirred you to do that, and just a little commercial on it so we can hear from you on that.
Yeah, thanks. I feel a little bit shy talking about it. I used to do a lot of these trainings, right up to like 3 days of it. So there's a lot of material. So I've just been through like COVID and up to now, just consolidating it. It's just an online course. It's at your pace. A lot of what we talked about today is on there. There's the tests to assess where you're at, checklists that you can do, tools to help. So, if you just go into my website, hopeharborcenter.com, click on services, there's the resources, there's a link to that there. So, and if you go through and do it and like a link doesn't work or something, please email me. I'm so scared about it.
Pamela Young, she's easy to find online. A couple announcements before I turn you to your tables to pray, because I'll give you some specific direction on your prayer time, and then you can dismiss yourselves after you're done. WRW, Waterloo Region Worships, is happening this Friday night, and it's happening at Forward Church in Cambridge at 7 p.m. So just put out another social media blast or invite your community to come be a part of that. And WRWT conference the very next day. They're hosting a one-day conference, and I don't have the address of where to go to direct you on that. So search something about WRW and conferences. They had over 200 people registered a week and a half ago. So good uptake on this engagement for it. And also we received news from Grandview Church that they are hosting Christ in Culture Conference. And so that's coming up that they wanted us to know about in April. And you can go to our One Church KW website to see what our next topics are for the upcoming months. We're hosting a guy who is a dentist, a pastor, and a politician. You know him as Harold Albrecht. He's going to be with us next month. And then we have Engaging Culture with Scott Stein in April. And then we're going to be talking about polarized thinking in the gospel of Jesus in May. So lots of relevant topics coming out that you can invite others to come to. So before you leave today, would you do something a little bit vulnerable? And instead of your whole table, because Creekside, you guys are all hanging out together, but maybe in groups of 3. And move into a group of 3. And the vulnerable part is just share something about, hey, out of today, here's what I think my next step's going to be. And you don't have to tell all, okay? That you've only got 30 seconds a minute, and then pray for one another, all right? So get in groups of 3. What's my next step going to be taking it out of today? And then pray for each other in that little triad, all right? Bless you for coming today.